It started as most of life's mundane disasters do, with a piece of paper. An email, actually. I almost deleted it. It had a generic subject line: "Your monthly statement is ready." The kind of digital noise you swat away without a second thought on your way to something more important. I was standing in my kitchen, a space so small you could cross it in 3 strides, making my morning coffee. It was a Tuesday. I remember the weak morning light filtering through the single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My life was up to that point a carefully curated ecosystem of predictability. I lived in a one-bedroom condo in a decent part of the city, not glamorous, but mine. Or more accurately, the bank's, but my name was on the deed. At 36, I worked a stable but unexciting job in logistics, coordinating shipments and solving problems for other people. My salary was enough. It paid the mortgage, the car note, the insurance, and left just enough for a disciplined savings plan and the occasional small pleasure, like buying a new video game or going out for a decent steak once a month. I was a man who lived by the spreadsheet. My personal budget was a work of art, a symphony of color-coded cells and automated formulas that tracked every dollar. I knew down to the cent what my life cost. My electricity bill was one of the most stable, most predictable figures in this entire financial equation. It was a point of pride. I was meticulous about my consumption. Lights off when I left a room. Electronics unplugged. The thermostat programmed with military precision. For the past 3 years, my bill had hovered between $25 and $35. It was a beautiful, reliable, low-cost constant in a world of ever-increasing expenses. So when I finally clicked open that email, my brain didn't immediately process the number I was seeing. $168.47. I blinked. I thought it was a typo. Maybe they'd accidentally added a 1 at the beginning. I closed the email and opened it again. The number was still there, stark and unapologetic. $168.47. It was an absurdity. It was a violation of the natural order of my life. My first reaction wasn't panic, but a kind of smug annoyance. Clearly, there had been a mistake, a clerical error. I pictured some intern at the power company fumbling with a keyboard, accidentally billing me for my entire building. I made a mental note to call them during my lunch break and get it sorted out. I had my past statements saved in a folder. I had the data. I would present them with the evidence, they would apologize profusely, and my bill would be corrected. My carefully balanced budget would be safe. I went about my morning, the incorrect number a minor irritant at the back of my mind. But as the hours wore on, the annoyance began to curdle into a low-grade anxiety. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if something was wrong with my meter? What if there was some kind of power leak, electricity bleeding out into the walls? I started to see my apartment not as a sanctuary, but as a potential financial liability. Every hum of the refrigerator, every flicker of the lead clock on the microwave suddenly sounded expensive. During my lunch break, I made the call. I was polite, patient, armed with my account number and a year's worth of billing history. I explained the situation to the customer service representative, a woman with a weary, monotone voice who sounded as if she'd been deflecting outrage all day. She pulled up my account. There was a long pause. I could hear her clicking on her keyboard. "No, sir," she said, her voice flat. "That amount is correct. It's based on your meter reading." My politeness evaporated. "That's impossible," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I live in a 600-square-foot condo. I live alone. My bill has never been over $40. How could I possibly use $168 worth of electricity?" She launched into a scripted explanation about rate hikes, fuel adjustment charges, and seasonal demand. It was a torrent of corporate jargon designed to confuse and placate. I tried to interrupt, to bring the conversation back to the sheer insanity of the numbers, but she just kept talking over me. "Sir, your usage was significantly higher this month," she concluded. I felt a surge of pure, helpless anger. "Higher how? Did I install a blast furnace in my living room without realizing it? This is a mistake. I want you to send someone out to check the meter." She informed me that they could do that, but if the meter was found to be functioning correctly, there would be a $90 service fee added to my next bill. It was a threat disguised as a service. A corporate checkmate. Argue with us and we'll charge you for the privilege. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. It was the absolute powerlessness of the situation that got to me. I was a single person up against a monolithic, faceless corporation. I had no recourse, no leverage. I was just a number in their system, a revenue stream to be squeezed. The rest of the day at work was a write-off. I stared at my screen, but all I could see was that number, $168.47. It was more than just a bill. It was a symbol of my own fragility. It was a reminder that no matter how carefully I planned, how meticulously I managed my risk, a faceless entity could arbitrarily change the rules and upend my entire world. That evening, I walked through my apartment like a detective at a crime scene. I became a fanatic, a paranoid energy auditor. I unplugged everything that wasn't essential. The toaster, the coffee maker, the television, the lamp in the corner I rarely used. I sat in the near darkness, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen as I frantically searched online forums. The screen was filled with stories like mine. People in small apartments, retired couples on a fixed income, single mothers, all seeing their bills double, triple, quadruple with no explanation. The forums were a chorus of rage and despair. We were all screaming into the same digital void, and the power company wasn't listening. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, the silence of the apartment now unnerving. Every time the refrigerator kicked on, I flinched. The number had infected my sense of peace, turning my own home against me. It wasn't about the money anymore, not really. I could, if I had to, absorb the cost. It would mean cutting back, eating into my savings, abandoning the small joys that made the daily grind bearable. But I could do it. The real injury was the violation, the feeling of being cheated, of being a victim of a systemic shakedown I was powerless to stop. It was the slow, creeping realization that the stable ground I thought I was standing on was actually a trap door. Over the next few days, my life became a series of small, joyless calculations. I started taking shorter, lukewarm showers. I ate cold meals to avoid using the microwave or the stove. I read books by the light of a single, low-wattage bulb. My home, once a place of comfort and refuge, became a space of deprivation, a place where I was constantly on edge, monitoring my own behavior for any wasteful infraction. I was trying to control the uncontrollable, to fight back in the only way I knew how. The next month's bill arrived like a judgment. I opened the email with a sense of dread, my heart pounding in my chest. I had lived like a monk. I had used almost nothing. The bill had to be lower. It was. It was $152.80. A wave of nausea washed over me. My extreme, life-altering measures had saved me a paltry $16. The hopelessness of it all crashed down on me. There was nothing I could do. The rage I had felt was replaced by a cold, heavy feeling of defeat. This was my new reality. A significant portion of my income, a carefully budgeted line item that was once a negligible expense, was now a voracious monster devouring my financial stability. My beautiful, orderly spreadsheet was a mess. The red numbers indicating a deficit seemed to scream at me. To balance the budget, I had to make sacrifices. I canceled my gym membership. I stopped my weekly pizza night. I cut my contribution to my savings account in half. Each cut felt like a small surrender, a piece of my life being chipped away. My conversations with friends became strained. When they'd suggest going out for a drink or catching a movie, I'd have to make excuses. "I'm busy," I'd say, or "I'm not feeling well." The shame of admitting that I couldn't afford a $10 movie ticket was too great. I was isolating myself, retreating into a world defined by a single inflated utility bill. The stress began to manifest physically. I had trouble sleeping, my mind racing with financial anxieties. I developed a persistent headache, a dull throb behind my eyes that never seemed to go away. I was irritable at work, my focus shattered. My carefully constructed world was cracking under the strain of a single, absurdly high bill. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, a quiet, personal economic crisis unfolding within the four walls of my tiny condo. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own life, and the worst part was, I knew this was just the beginning. The initial shock and rage soon settled into a kind of grim, exhausting new normal. My life became a constant, obsessive performance of energy conservation that yielded almost no results. I was fighting a war against an invisible enemy, and I was losing. My apartment, once a source of pride, now felt like a hostile environment. I started timing my showers, trying to beat my previous record by a few seconds. I'd eat dinner by the cold, blue light of my laptop screen to avoid turning on the overhead light in the kitchen. I even unplugged my Wi-Fi router when I went to bed, a small, pathetic act of defiance that probably saved me a fraction of a penny. This wasn't living, it was a state of perpetual anxiety. The joy was gone from my home. It was no longer a place to relax and unwind, but a battleground of consumption where I was always the losing party. My friends noticed the change in me. I was distant, withdrawn. The easy camaraderie we shared was replaced by my constant, vague excuses. One Friday night, my best friend called. "We're all heading to that new brewery downtown," he said, his voice full of the casual cheerfulness I once possessed. "You have to come, you've been a ghost for 2 months." I stood in my darkened living room, the phone pressed to my ear, and the lie came easily. "Man, I'm swamped with a project for work. Really have to burn the midnight oil on this one." The truth felt too humiliating to admit. The truth was that a $30 night out, something I wouldn't have thought twice about before, now represented a significant and stressful financial decision. It was the cost of a week's worth of groceries. It was a chunk of the monstrous electricity bill. So I stayed home alone, eating a can of cold beans and watching a pirated movie on my laptop, telling myself I was being financially responsible. But it felt like poverty. It was a poverty of spirit, a self-imposed exile driven by shame and a number on a bill. The third bill came, $171.12. It had gone up again. I had lived like a hermit in near-total darkness, and it had gone up. I didn't even feel anger anymore, just a profound sense of futility. It felt like I was being punished, though for what crime I couldn't say. It was a systemic gaslighting. The company's official position was that my usage was the problem, while my lived reality proved that my usage was irrelevant. I was paying for something I wasn't using, and there was no one to appeal to, no authority that would hear my case. My work performance, which had always been stellar, began to suffer. The constant stress and lack of sleep were taking their toll. My mind, once sharp and focused on complex logistical chains, was now cluttered with anxieties about kilowatt hours and variable rate charges. I made a costly mistake on a shipment, misrouting a container of electronics to the wrong continent. It was $1 million error that my company's insurance would have to cover. My boss called me into his office. He was a fair man, but his patience was wearing thin. "This isn't like you," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right at home?" I wanted to tell him. I wanted to break down and confess that my life was unraveling because of a utility bill. I wanted to explain that the constant, grinding pressure of this one single inflated expense was crushing me. But how could I say that? It sounded insane. It sounded like the excuse of an incompetent employee, so I lied again. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hollow. "I've just been dealing with some personal family matters. It won't happen again." He accepted the explanation, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I was no longer a reliable asset. I was a potential liability. The incident was a wake-up call. I realized I was on a dangerous downward spiral. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was affecting my career, my friendships, my mental health. I decided to fight back, to try a different approach. I spent an entire weekend researching. I read the fine print on my utility contract. I delved into state utility commission regulations. I learned about energy audits, smart meters, and consumer advocacy groups. I was arming myself with knowledge, preparing for a second offensive. I paid $100 I couldn't really afford for a private energy auditor to come to my condo. He was a grizzled man with a thermal imaging camera and a no-nonsense attitude. He spent 2 hours scanning my walls, checking my appliances, and examining my meter. His conclusion was swift and disheartening. "Son," he said, packing up his equipment, "your condo is tight as a drum, your appliances are energy efficient, your usage is ridiculously low, there's nothing wrong here, the problem isn't you, it's them." He confirmed my deepest fear. I was doing everything right, and it didn't matter. The problem was systemic. Armed with the auditor's official report, I filed a formal complaint with the State Public Utilities Commission. I wrote a long, detailed letter, complete with copies of my past bills, my auditor's report, and screenshots from online forums showing I was not alone. It felt like a significant step, a move from passive victim to active protagonist in my own story. I imagined my letter landing on the desk of some dedicated public servant who would champion my cause. The response came 6 weeks later. It was a form letter, a masterpiece of bureaucratic indifference. It stated that they had reviewed my case and had conferred with the utility provider. It concluded that the charges were consistent with the approved rate structure and that my case was now closed. Case closed, just like that. My meticulously prepared evidence, my last hope for a fair hearing, was dismissed with a generic, soulless paragraph. The absolute crushing finality of it broke something in me. The fight was over. I had lost. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went out, I walked to a dingy bar a few blocks from my apartment, and I started drinking. I drank cheap whiskey, the kind that burns all the way down. I didn't want to think about my budget, my job, or the soul-crushing injustice of it all. I just wanted to feel numb. I drank until the edges of my anxiety were blurred, and the heavy weight on my chest felt a little lighter. I fell into a conversation with the man sitting next to me at the bar. He was older, a construction worker by the looks of his calloused hands and paint-splattered boots. We talked about nothing in particular: sports, the weather, the bad music playing on the jukebox. Then he asked me what was wrong. "You look like a man who's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders," he said, his voice raspy. And for the first time, I told someone the whole, unvarnished truth. I told him about the bills, the customer service calls, the auditor, the state commission. I told him how this one small thing had metastasized, how it was poisoning every aspect of my life. I expected him to laugh or to look at me like I was crazy. Instead, he just nodded slowly, his expression serious. "It ain't about the money, is it?" he said, his words cutting right to the heart of the matter. "It's about the respect. They're treating you like you're nothing, like you don't matter. They're stealing from you, and they're doing it with a smile on their face and a signed contract in their hand." His simple, profound understanding of my situation was more comforting than anything I had heard in months. He got it. I wasn't crazy. My anger was justified. "Let me tell you something," he continued, leaning in closer. "These people, these big companies, the government, they don't care about you. They'll bleed you dry and then send you a bill for the service. You can't win playing by their rules because they write the rules. You have to find a different way to live." We talked for hours. He told me about his own struggles, about fighting with insurance companies, with banks, with the city over zoning permits. He was a man who had been battling the system his whole life. His stories were full of hardship, but they weren't stories of defeat. They were stories of resilience, of finding ways to survive, of creating a life on his own terms. I walked home from the bar that night with a strange sense of clarity. The whiskey buzz had faded, but the conversation had sparked something in me. Was right, I couldn't win by their rules. My meticulous record-keeping, my formal complaints, my appeals to a higher authority, it was all useless. I was playing a rigged game. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop playing. I had to change the game. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover, but without the familiar sense of dread. The despair had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The company had pushed me into a corner. They had taken my money, my peace of mind, and my sense of security. I couldn't get those things back by continuing down the same path. I was done being a victim. I was done living in the dark. I was done letting a number on a piece of paper dictate the terms of my existence. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to pay them, not the full amount anyway. It was a reckless, terrifying thought, a complete violation of my own deeply ingrained principles of financial responsibility. But it also felt like the first real empowered choice I had made in months. They had declared war on me, and I was finally ready to fight back, not on their terms, but on mine. The decision not to pay the full amount was like stepping off a cliff. It was an act of rebellion completely at odds with my nature. I was a rule follower, a man who paid his bills on time, who believed in the system. But the system had failed me so profoundly that my faith was shattered. My new strategy was simple. I would pay exactly what my bill should have been. I calculated my average cost for the past 3 years, added a generous 20% for inflation and rate hikes, and arrived at a figure of $38. I wrote a check for that amount, put it in the mail with the billing slip, and on the memo line of the check I wrote, "For services rendered at fair market value." It was a small, symbolic gesture, but it felt momentous. I was no longer a passive victim accepting their absurd charges. I was dictating my own terms. The automated calls started about a week later. A cheerful, robotic voice would inform me that my account was past due and that a late fee had been applied. I would hang up immediately. Then came the letters, printed on red paper, the universal color for financial alarm. The language grew more urgent, using words like delinquent and service interruption. The original bill of $171 had now ballooned with late fees and penalties. The number on the paper was growing, but my fear of it was shrinking. By defying it, I had robbed it of its power over me. I took the money I was saving, the $100+ a month they were trying to extort from me, and I started living again. I rejoined my gym. I went out for that beer with my friends. I bought a new video game. These were small acts of reclaiming my life, of refusing to let a corporate predator dictate my happiness. The anxiety that had plagued me for months began to recede, replaced by a kind of defiant calm. I knew this couldn't last forever. I was buying myself time, but a confrontation was inevitable. Yet I felt more in control than I had in a long time. At work, my performance rebounded. With the mental burden of the bill lifted, my focus returned. I was sharp again, efficient, and I successfully managed several complex projects, earning back my boss's trust. I was rebuilding my life on one front while a storm gathered on another. One Saturday, about 2 months into my personal financial rebellion, I got the notice I had been expecting. It was a final warning, a stark, formal letter stating that if the full balance was not paid within 10 business days, my electricity would be disconnected. This was it, the moment of truth. My first instinct was a surge of the old panic. The thought of having no power, of being plunged into darkness, was terrifying. It was a tangible consequence, not just a number on a page. I thought about my food spoiling in the refrigerator, about not being able to charge my phone or use my computer. It was a step back into the dark ages. For a moment, I considered giving in. I had the money in my savings. I could pay the outrageous balance, which was now over $500 with all the fees, and make it all go away. It would be a bitter pill to swallow, a complete surrender, but it would be the safe, easy path. I spent that weekend wrestling with the decision. I walked for hours around the city, turning it over and over in my mind. What was I really fighting for? It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. It was about refusing to be bullied. If I gave in now, what had the last few months of stress and defiance been for? I thought about the conversation with the old construction worker at the bar. You can't win playing by their rules. Paying the bill would be playing by their rules. It would be validating their right to charge whatever they wanted, for whatever reason they concocted. It would be an admission that I, the individual, had no power against the corporation. On Sunday night, I made my decision. I was not going to pay. I was going to let them cut me off. The idea was both terrifying and liberating. I was going to call their bluff and face the consequences, whatever they might be. I spent the next week preparing for what I started calling the blackout. It felt like I was preparing for a natural disaster, a hurricane that only I could see coming. I bought a high-quality cooler, bags of ice, several powerful battery packs for my phone and laptop, and a collection of LED lanterns and headlamps. I cooked all the perishable food I had in the freezer and fridge, eating large, strange meals. I downloaded movies and seasons of TV shows onto my laptop. I told my boss I might need to work from a coffee shop for a few days due to some planned electrical work in my building. I was creating a contingency plan, building a lifeboat. On the final day, the day of the scheduled disconnection, I woke up with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. I went to work and tried to focus, but my mind was at home, waiting for the lights to go out. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be a final notification. When I got home that evening, the lights were still on. The air conditioning hummed its familiar tune. Nothing had happened. A wave of anticlimax washed over me. Had they blinked? Had my partial payments and my defiance somehow confused their automated system? The next day was the same, and the next. For a week, I lived on a knife's edge, expecting the power to go out at any moment. The lanterns and coolers sat in my living room, a constant reminder of the battle I was waging. The uncertainty was a different kind of stress, a low-grade hum of what if that was almost as bad as the dread I had felt before. Then, the following Tuesday afternoon, it happened. I was in the middle of a video conference call for work when my screen went black. The lights went out. The air conditioner sputtered into silence. The sudden, absolute quiet was deafening. My apartment was plunged into a dim, twilight gloom. They had done it. My first feeling was not fear, but a strange, exhilarating rush. The waiting was over. The worst had happened, and I was still here. I was okay. I calmly typed a message to my team on my phone, which was still connected to the cellular network. Apologies, everyone. Looks like that electrical work started early. Power outage in my building. I'll reconnect from a different location shortly. I packed my laptop into my backpack, grabbed one of my pre-charged battery packs, and walked out of my dark, silent apartment. The hallway of my building was lit by emergency lighting. My neighbors' doors were all closed, the sounds of their televisions and lives continuing unabated. This was my fight alone. I walked down the street to a coffee shop, ordered an iced tea, and logged back into my meeting as if nothing had happened. From the outside, I was just another person working remotely. No one knew I was an urban refugee, a man who had been disconnected from the grid. That night, I went back to my apartment. It was strange and unfamiliar in the darkness. I navigated by the beam of a headlamp. The air was already growing warm and stale without the AC. I ate a cold dinner and read a book by lantern light. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Without the constant hum of electronics, I could hear the sounds of the city outside my window, the distant traffic, the faint cry of a siren. In a strange way, I felt more connected to the world, not less. The next few days were a lesson in adaptation. I showered in the dark, learned the most efficient way to live out of a cooler, and became a connoisseur of the city's best public spaces with free Wi-Fi and power outlets. My life became nomadic within my own city. I spent my days at the library or coffee shops and my nights in my silent, powerless condo. It was inconvenient, but it wasn't the catastrophe I had feared. It was manageable. What I discovered was that the fear of the disconnection was far worse than the reality of it. The power company's greatest weapon wasn't the act of cutting the electricity. It was the threat of it. The threat was what kept people compliant, what made them pay exorbitant bills without question. By accepting the worst-case scenario, by living through it, I had disarmed them. After a week of this, I knew I couldn't live like this forever. It was a point I had to prove to myself, and I had proven it. I could survive without them. I was not entirely at their mercy. Now I needed a new plan, a way to move forward. Surrender was still not an option, but I needed a more permanent solution than living by lantern light. And that's when I started researching the one thing that had seemed like a distant, unaffordable fantasy for eco-warriors and the super-rich: solar. The idea was absurd. I lived in a condo. I didn't have a roof. But my research led me down a rabbit hole of new technology: balcony solar panels, high-capacity portable power stations, a whole subculture of people finding ways to generate their own power to achieve a small degree of energy independence. It was a long shot, a crazy, expensive idea, but it was a plan. It was a way to stop fighting their game and start building my own. It was a path not just to getting my lights back on, but to taking back control for good. The idea of personal solar power took root in my mind and became an obsession. It was the perfect solution, not just a practical fix, but a philosophical victory. It was a way of declaring my independence from the very system that had caused me so much grief. My research revealed a burgeoning world of portable, apartment-friendly solar technology. It wasn't about massive panels on a suburban roof. It was about smaller, high-efficiency panels that could be mounted on a balcony railing, connected to a powerful, suitcase-sized battery unit, often called a solar generator. This wasn't just for camping anymore. It was becoming a viable option for urban dwellers seeking resilience against blackouts and rising energy costs. The problem, of course, was the cost. A decent setup, a few panels and a power station capable of running my essential electronics, would cost several $1,000s. It was a huge investment, far more than the overdue bill I was refusing to pay. I spent days staring at my savings account, the buffer I had so carefully built over the years. This money was my safety net, my insurance against job loss or a medical emergency. The idea of spending a huge chunk of it on this project was terrifying. It felt like a massive gamble. But what was the alternative? To surrender and go back to paying an ever-increasing, unjust bill for the rest of my life. That felt like a different kind of gamble, a bet that the system would magically fix itself, which I now knew was a fantasy. This was an investment in my own freedom. It was a high upfront cost to eliminate a parasitic monthly expense forever. It was its own form of risk management. I made my choice. I liquidated a portion of my emergency fund and placed the order. The boxes arrived a week later, and it felt like Christmas. I spent an entire weekend on my small balcony, carefully assembling the mounting brackets, running the cables, and reading the technical manuals. My neighbors probably thought I was crazy, this guy in a dark apartment spending his days tinkering with strange equipment on his balcony. The moment of truth came on a bright, sunny afternoon. I had the panels mounted and angled towards the sun. I connected them to the power station, and a small LCD screen flickered to life. It showed an arrow pointing from a sun icon to a battery icon. I was generating my own electricity. It was a trickle, just a few hundred watts, but it was mine. It was clean, silent, and most importantly, it was free. That evening, I ran an extension cord from the fully charged power station into my living room. I plugged in a lamp. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch. Light flooded the room. It was the most beautiful, most satisfying light I had ever seen. It was the light of self-reliance. My new life began. My solar setup wasn't powerful enough to run my whole apartment. Central air conditioning and my electric stove were out of the question, but it was more than enough for the essentials. It powered my lights, my refrigerator, a new, hyper-efficient model I bought, my laptop, my phone, and my television. I had created my own personal microgrid. I learned to live in rhythm with the sun. On bright, clear days, I would have an abundance of power. On cloudy, rainy days, I would conserve it, reading a book instead of watching TV. I became acutely aware of the weather, of the seasons, in a way I never had before. My consumption was directly tied to my production. It was an honest, transparent system. After a month of living successfully off my own power, I called the utility company. I got a different representative this time, a man who sounded young and surprisingly helpful. I told him I wanted to close my account. He was confused. "Sir, you have a large outstanding balance, and our records show your service is currently disconnected. To close the account, you'll need to settle the balance." I felt a calm I hadn't felt in our previous interactions. "There seems to be a dispute about that balance," I said, my voice even and firm. "But that's fine. You can send the final bill to the collection agency. I will not be requiring your services any longer." There was a long silence on the other end. I had called their bluff, and it had worked. I was no longer their customer. I was no longer a source of revenue. My problem was no longer my problem. It was now a problem for their collections department, a department I was fully prepared to deal with. I knew it would impact my credit score, and I was prepared for that. A perfect credit score was a tool for playing their game, for getting loans and mortgages. I had no intention of borrowing large sums of money anytime soon. A slightly damaged credit score was a small price to pay for my freedom. My life found a new, better equilibrium. I was saving over $150 a month, which I funneled into replenishing my emergency fund and slowly expanding my solar setup. My finances were healthier than ever. My friends, who had been bewildered by my electrical issues, were fascinated by my new lifestyle. My apartment became a minor tourist attraction for them, coming over to see the mad scientist's lab. My story, which had started as a source of shame, became a source of pride, a story of defiance and ingenuity. The experience changed me in a fundamental way. I had always seen myself as a cog in the machine, a responsible citizen who followed the rules and paid his dues. I learned that sometimes the machine is broken and the rules are designed to benefit someone else. I learned the importance of self-reliance, of questioning the systems we take for granted. I learned that true security doesn't come from a stable job or a healthy savings account, but from the ability to adapt, to solve your own problems, to be resilient in the face of injustice. My world is smaller now in some ways. I can't run a dozen appliances at once, but it's also infinitely larger. I am no longer a passive consumer of power. I am an active producer. I am no longer a helpless victim of a faceless corporation. I am a man who took control of his own life. Every evening when I switch on that lamp, powered by sunlight captured on my own balcony, I feel a quiet, profound sense of victory. They tried to leave me in the dark. Instead, they forced me to find my own light. Comment your thoughts below because your perspective might be exactly what someone else here needs to hear.